we as women, we need to challenge, to change, to better the world, whether family-wise or in the political arena.
I do know that men do tend to talk a lot. They're very good at calling meetings, but that's just about it. They call meetings and that's it. The women do call meetings and they get on with it.
We have to look at tradition and culture in a very perceptive and analytical way. We have to discard those traditions that prevent women's progress and modify and work with those traditions that help women.
Mothers of humanity, teachers of society, and transmitters of culture. Women are all these things and more. Traditionally guardians of the family, their contribution to the development of the young, the family and the community is unquestioned. But today, women in the Pacific are beginning to challenge traditional roles. They now realize their collective value and potential to assist in the development of the region. No longer will they stand silently by while others determine the future of their children and the future of their islands.
There's a lot of challenge. There are lots of challenges in the Pacific for Pacific women, but I think it's most important that they change for the sake of suiting themselves, not for the sake of emulating others. They look at women from developed countries, they look at women from industrialized countries, and they think, oh, we must be like them.
In the Pacific community, women play a major role in the development of community life. And we need to develop the potential women have to influence the community in improving their life in general.
Improving their life in general means taking a hard look at some of the current problems they face and acting positively and decisively to resolve those problems. At the 4th Regional Women's Conference held the 19th through the 23rd of September 1988, Pacific women did just that. The conference provided a venue for women to express their concerns and formulate strategies to increase their participation in a region undergoing rapid social change.
We'd like to look at such problems and see how we...
It also provided a chance for them to identify the challenges that they face.
But are we receptive to the idea of...
As we gathered here for the opening of the 4th Regional Women's Conference, I would like to welcome you all to the first part of
the 5-day conference was co-hosted by the South Pacific Commission and the government of Fiji.
And all those who are going to be involved may grant...
Official representatives from 20 Pacific Island countries were welcomed in a traditional Fijian ceremony. The conference was officially opened by the then Secretary General of the South Pacific Commission, Paloni Tuisasopo.
I present to you also that the women of the Pacific must take the torch, must run with it, because if you don't, we have a much better risk, much better chance to lose in the race to the future. We cannot be too conservative, yet we must hold on to what makes us Pacific.
This was followed by an address by the Minister for Women and Social Welfare of Fiji, Andifina Tambakaudoro.
On behalf of the government of Fiji and also the women of Fiji, a very warm welcome to all you visitors from abroad. It would appear that we have, to put it mildly, quite a few problems. However, our strength lies in our peoples and their rich cultural heritage. The NGOs.
Throughout conference discussions, equal opportunity for women in all sectors of society was called for.
Especially strategies, and by strategies I would like to define...
Topics that dominated the discussions were business and employment, education and training, politics, law, agriculture, fisheries and forestry.
Well, I think the biggest challenge for Pacific women today is trying to get society to see them as equal to men.
Well, I think it's for us to see what is our role in this world and to better our status as women in the Pacific.
Women I see regarded as second best. They're there but not to be heard. They're there to be seen but not to be heard.
Men and governments are much more aware of charges of discrimination, and I think they're very careful to get around them by doing things that aren't blatantly discriminatory, but that they still are basically discriminatory, and I think that's what women have to look out for.
Most of the things that hinders the changes happening in the Pacific are the men themselves. They don't wish to see the women having to make decisions.
I think that the advancement of women is a long and very arduous struggle, and I think the results will materialize over a long period of time.
According to the motion, we would like to, but with the information that will be made available.
The first plenary session of this Women's Conference dealt with future directions for the Pacific Women's Resource Bureau. The Bureau is a program of the South Pacific Commission established in response to recommendations of the Seminar of South Pacific Women held in Tahiti in July 1981. The Bureau provides various services for women throughout the region.
I found myself doing more stitching and developing...
Participants also discussed the future of the Community Education Training Center located in Suva, Fiji. The center, known as CETC, is also a program of the South Pacific Commission.
And I feel
it should also be reflective of the women of the South Pacific that not only do we offer this training, or predominantly offer the training for the women in the village communities or the rural communities, but it also begin to evolve and develop curriculums to which would also focus on the different levels of participation to which women are now acquiring and achieving great things.
Workshops provided the women with a chance to discuss specific issues of concern. One of the workshops highlighted health issues affecting Pacific Islanders.
Now, how great is the problem of alcohol abuse in the Pacific Islands?
The growing threat of AIDS, sexually transmitted diseases, and alcohol and drug abuse were among the topics discussed.
Good statistics are very difficult to get in the Pacific, but it is obvious to many people that the problem is increasing and becoming quite serious.
In this particular workshop that we had in health, we dealt with three main issues, and that was nutrition and nutrition-related diseases, alcohol and drug abuse, and also STD, sexually transmitted diseases, and AIDS, because we thought that these were the three health problems that have been of priority concern to the Pacific and the Pacific women.
A health display was set up by CETC students.
The other thing is large families. If a couple has 6 or more children, then it would be hard for them to budget the money to buy the food, and the children will not have enough, and that will lead to this.
I attribute this not necessarily to more abuse.
Another workshop looked at women and the law, domestic violence, rape and child abuse
If you will
emerged
forgive me
as
a personal
topics of
anecdote.
priority concern
Years
to women
ago,
attending
when I was
this
still
workshop.
practicing law as a
The police are still saying, we will stay out of it, it's nothing to do with us, let them solve it out, because that's between the family. And that is something that is hindering the women in this region.
If men are going to brutalize their women, society has a right to comment on their behavior. It must go to court because the courts must have the right to say, what you're doing is wrong. This woman has a right not to be inflicted with pain, and you must respect that right.
I think that an awful lot of what they're doing and what they want can be achieved if they get the women on the bench. The other thing I think they should do is get women into their various legislative bodies. That a genuine interest in the affairs of women is only going to be pushed forward.
Greater autonomy,
Business,
greater
employment,
self-reliance,
and income-generating activities were looked at in another conference workshop.
I think women today are caught up in this dual role, as Christine has pointed out, of, earning an income, running the household, and raising the family. That's 3 roles right there.
I think the biggest challenge, though, for Pacific Island women at this time is to know how to balance those business opportunities with keeping the values and principles of their respective island cultures.
There is quite a lot of business opportunities for women, and one of the most obvious one is, of course, handicrafts and sewing and all those. In our society, men don't want to be involved in those little things where you fiddle around with needles or with your hands.
I think what we're all concerned about is taking control of our lives, and I think that that's probably the most important thing. We can't have that control without having some financial control or control over our financial resources, because that leads to the ability to be able to develop more fully and to contribute to national development.
A couple of words ahead of
The need to strengthen communication between women in the region was the topic of several conference discussions. It was also addressed in a workshop on communication and networking.
At least 2 or 3 words.
And efficient administration.
This workshop provided participants with hands-on experience in radio broadcasting.
Fiji, God's blessings be with you all. Thank you.
Many women who are at this particular communication workshop have expressed the need to help the journalists as they do their reporting, for radio work, for print work, that's for newspaper, and for video and television. Then the specific needs in other professional areas. I think even the awareness that we need to organize a program to address the leaders, the decision makers, radio commission members who could make positive decisions favoring women in development.
When all is collected here, it goes.
Technology that is appropriate for Pacific Island societies was the topic of another workshop. This featured a display on the use of solar energy. There was also a demonstration on the making of a smokeless stove. Yet another workshop focused on the environment.
It is the land that counts in the Pacific. It is the women that work the land, not the men. Women are subsistence agriculturalists.
The type of questions that Pacific women are asking about the environment are particularly relevant at the moment. The issues of traditional knowledge, how one incorporates into modern lifestyles the traditional ways of conserving the environment. That has been one of the major issues.
And we have another resolution that we're suggesting, and that is to for women and women's organizations to lobby the governments in the aspect of land development and exploitation, in that governments should be conducting environmental impact assessment before they develop the land, and also to consult the local people, because they're the ones who will be affected.
We women got to have a good look in our sea, especially as that is our main dish, fish. We never realized what's really happening in the ocean these days. This dumping waste, nuclear waste in the water, it's going to ruin our fish.
And I think that women's organisations, with their energy, strength and great numbers, do have a specific role to play in environmental education. I think that the challenge is for them to take up this role and to be the future environmental educators of the region.
Has tried to guide women's thoughts towards greater achievements.
Other workshops addressed issues in agriculture, fisheries, forestry, and development planning. One of the main objectives of the workshops was the drafting of recommendations. Recommendations the women hope will prompt their governments to act.
That have been stipulated here when we are making our recommendations. We were concerned at the very poor rate of transfer of available and proper technology in the South Pacific. Another, we recommend that the Women's Bureau support the setting up, I've said that.
Over 80 recommendations were made by the women at the conference, proving that Pacific women are no longer standing silent.
We are capable, as representatives of our people, that we could go back and move the forces in our respective countries to get things done.
We are suggesting that we become pressure groups on governments. We're suggesting that we actually do things ourselves.
Get the women in their own countries to get their foundation work done.
I think the women themselves, the delegates themselves, have made some very valid recommendations. For instance, the dissemination of information well before conferences.
We were able to make recommendations to organizations that could give assistance to the Pacific.
Lady Magistrate here, you've got to learn to vote.
Changing the thinking of men and even women will not be easy.
They even think there needs to be additional...
The first barrier that we need to address is attitudinal.
Men, I think, are some of the most obvious obstacles, but I think apart from that, it's the community attitudes themselves. It's not just the men, really, it's everybody, including women.
Women all over the world face very similar issues, both in developing and developed countries.
Often too fast.
They recognize the difficulties.
Some days we feel that change is nearly as violent as a fist in the face.
If we're going to get anything done, women have to do it now while we're here all together.
We will just go home and submit a report as we're supposed to, or are we really going to make this recommendation our own and try and share them not only with leaders but also with women at every level? That requires a lot of individual and demands very deep belief in what you are doing.
We need more to come out and just push us to really implement action, take the action and do it, not just talk and write it down in papers and that's it, and wait for the 3 years.
In Papua New Guinea.
But at meetings such as this 4th Regional Women's Conference, women are taking the first step.
Women must be in the forefront of change. Our leadership is more critical than ever before because there is so much change. Women can either gain or lose much more in a much shorter time than ever before.
As a woman in this whole development issue, one of the things that I look for when I go to conferences like this is that to work as a group is very good, but I think you must also look for the individuals who have the energy, to push these things along. And I think this sort of forum
gives you that opportunity.
In this particular conference, some of them sound like politicians, if I can put it crudely that way. They're talking about lobbying their governments, and they're making recommendations.
Government or other organizations don't do what they're supposed to do. At least we are moving ahead. So when they see us move ahead, they have to move up the same pace as us so that they can match us. Otherwise, if they don't, the women can turn back and say, listen, you didn't do what we asked you to do. We'll go to the polls and take over the government.
There's so much to do. I feel like we want to go back and talk with the other women and see what we can do about sharing this information again. It is an inspiration.
I think this conference has done a lot to continue to boost the morale of women and the confidence of Pacific women.
I've got to thank this conference. I've really gained something out of it.
It is a very good thing that we all come together from different parts of the country to sit and talk.
I'm really proud to see the women getting together and really do their own thinking and their own work. I think it's good to show that we are capable.
Do we on arrival back in our home countries carry these responsibilities out? And it's not just, well, I went to represent such and such and therefore I suppose I must. It's not a case of I suppose. You must. It is a responsibility and you are duty bound to do that.
Rarotonga is often described as one of the most beautiful islands in the Pacific. Rugged hills and deep valleys in the island center drop down to a small fringe of farmable land along the coast. With its beautiful white sandy beaches and turquoise blue waters, Rarotonga has become a popular tourist destination. Tourism accounts for an important part of Rarotonga's economy. The town of Avarua is the administrative and industrial center of both Rarotonga and the Cook Islands as a whole. The Cook Islands gained internal self-government in 1965, but it remains in free association with New Zealand. The Cook Islands plays an important role in regional affairs. In October 1988, it highlighted that role by hosting the 28th South Pacific Conference. The South Pacific Conference is an annual meeting of representatives from 27 governments and administrations of the Pacific region. Each year, the conference examines and adopts the work program and budget for the South Pacific Commission. The official opening of the 28th South Pacific Conference began with a traditional Cook Islands welcome. Each year, delegates of the 27-member governments and administrations of the Commission meet at the conference to discuss the Commission's work program and approve the budget for the following year. The conference also discusses other social and economic issues which face the region. The chairman of the conference, Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Cook Islands, Norman George, and the Secretary General of the South Pacific Commission, Palauni Tuasosopo, led the delegates to their seats for the beginning of the official ceremony.